Welcome to part 15 of this series, trying to locate the sons of Noah and where they really went to. In this video we're going to be looking at Tyrus. Now Tyrus is the seventh son of Japheth, and Japheth is the son of Noah. Let's see what Josephus says about Tyrus. He says that Tyrus was, he ruled over the Thracians, but the Greeks changed the name into Thracians. Now, I'm not sure if this word Thracians is actually connected to Tyrus. It sounds similar, but I don't think it is. It might be connected to Greek mythology, and this person known as Thrax, okay? Simply the quintessential Thracian. And he's regarded as one of the reputed son of Ares, and Ares is known as the god of war. But Ares himself was also known as Thrax, and he was also the patron of Thrace. So this could be actually where this word Thrace and Thracian comes from Thrax. And we haven't done our deep dive into Greek mythology yet. We still want to try to see who were these, these gods like Ares and Zeus. We might cover that soon. Let's see what the Book of Jubilees says about where the Thracians may have dwelt. It says, "And for Tyrus there came forth the seventh portion," because he's the seventh son, "four great islands in the midst of the sea, which reached to the portion of Ham." Okay. Now I found this nice map, which kind of shows it in an interesting way. Okay, so here's the portion of Ham, but can you see I've got these four islands in the midst of the sea, and how they approach, they're kind of before the land of Ham. So could these be the four islands that Jubilees is speaking about? You've got Cyprus, Candia, that was the old name for Crete, Sicily, and Sardinia. So maybe this is where the Thracians originated, on these islands. Now let's have a look to see what what the appearance of these Thracians were. Now there's a few different views on this. There's one view that from Xenophanes that says the Ethiopians say that their gods are snub-nosed and black. The Thracians that theirs have light blue eyes and red hair. So there's a connection to the Thracians in red hair, or light-colored hair and blue eyes. But there's another train of thought which says that that the people of Tyrus who inhabited the Mediterranean had like a reddish-brown complexion, okay, or like a bronze, and that they had long black hair. Okay, now this is taken from The Sea Kings of Crete by James Bakey. Okay, he does a book on the Sea Kings of Crete, which is the Minoans, okay, ancient Minoan civilization. Now, I just want to make this important distinction that James Bakey is not saying that the Sea Kings of Crete were Thracians. Okay, he's just talking about the Minoan civilization. The person in this article that we're reading from, he's using this quote and saying that trying to connect the Thracians to the Minoans, and then using this description to say, is this what the Minoans looked like? Because this article tries to link the Thracians to the Native American Indians, and this description kind of supports that with being red, bronzed, or being ruddy, and with dark hair and beardless faces. But I did find another quote to kind of support this idea, because Julius Firmicus says, in Ethiopia all are born black, in Germany white, and in Thrace red. So there's another connection with Thrace and red. And Julius Firmicus, he was a Roman Latin writer and astrologer who lived in about 306 to 337 AD. So there does seem to be a connection with the Thracians and ruddiness or redness. And I have a few pictures here to show you. Now this is a Minoan, okay? This is not a Thracian. This is from Crete. So remember, this is not a Thracian. This is someone from Crete. But this is just showing these plumes and the dark hair, and how that person was trying to connect this people of Crete to the Native American Indians. Here's another picture from Crete. Now remember, this is Minoan, so not Thracians, but you can see this ruddy, dark complexion of the skin color. So some people have wondered whether these Minoans are connected to Thrace, to the Thracians, because if you remember the Book of Jubilees is saying that possibly these four islands are connected to Tyrus, then you might have had Thracians living on Crete, So were the Thracians connected to the Minoan civilization? Or maybe there was different people, different tribes on this island. So that would take a bit more investigation. But remember, these are Minoans, so we're not saying that these are Thracians. Okay, the next thing I want to do is to kind of talk about what we've been discussing with Elam and Persia, this picture that we've been working on, and trying to see if Tyrus can help us with this, because remember Josephus, he says that that the Persians come out of Elam, remember? But I found another legend that says, this is from the Talmud, that says Tyrus is the ancestor of the Persians. So now we've got two different views, that the Persians come out of Tyrus, that's the Talmud, and Josephus saying that the Persians come out of Elam. So how do we make sense of this? Maybe both could be right in a way, because we've kind of spoken about this before, but let me just read this to you again. That the Persian historian El-Tabari recounts a tradition that the wife of Cush was named Carnabil, daughter of Batiwal, son of Tyrus, and that she bore him the Abyssinians, the Sindhis, and the Indians. So this is where it gets fascinating, because you've got Cush combining with Tyrus. So this is this is Ham and Japheth, the line of Ham and the line of Japheth, and this combining produces these Abyssinians and these Sindhis and these Indians. Now, we can't be sure exactly what he means by Indians and Sindhis, because remember we've spoken about this confusion with Ethiopia and Indians. Even some regions of East Africa was actually called India. But we do have Sindhis. Let me show you a map. In this region here, between India and Pakistan, this is a Sindhi inhabited area. So could these be the Sindhis that he's speaking about? That would make sense, because he says Sindhis and Indians. So maybe he is speaking about this region. But then you can start to see how it starts to make sense, how you would have this confusion between India and Ethiopia, because you've got these Indian-like cultures and appearances also in Abyssinia in Ethiopia. So can you see that when the Greeks see these Ethiopians and this culture in India, and then they see it in Africa, how it would create confusion. But the most important thing for us is actually this Abyssinians, because if we look at the map, this is the region of Abyssinia. Okay, so now it's saying that Cush and Tyrus came together, through their descendants, and there was this nation of Abyssinia which is connected to Tyrus and Cush. But remember, we're looking at Elam here, so you can see how potentially maybe the Elamites combined or mixed with the Abyssinians because of the closeness of the region, and that could have produced Persians. Okay, Abyssinia and Elam. And then both of those ideas could be true, that the Persians could come out of Tyrus, because you've got Abyssinians which also are connected to Tyrus, but that they could also come out of Elam. So that's quite fascinating, because it shows, it starts to make sense, the history starts to make sense with the picture. Okay, that you've got Tyrus, descendants of Tyrus in this region of Abyssinia, and then you've got Elam in this region. And maybe that connecting of those kingdoms of Abyssinia and Elam, creating Persians, that kind of strengthens this idea that the Persians could have been in this region as like their base, like their home. But obviously, when you think about the empire, it would have reached from Ethiopia to India. Let's just read you that verse that I showed you. This is Esther 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Xerxes, which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. So we can see that empire reaching from India to Ethiopia, and how now it's starting to make more sense, because this is Tyrus and Cush and Elam connection, that you've got Indian cultures and kingdoms here, but you've also got Indian cultures obviously in India proper, let's just say. So when the Persian Empire starts to rise, the Persians wouldn't have to conquer India necessarily, because it's the same blood. So let's just go to that map here. These nations and tribes and kingdoms in this region, they might actually submit and be okay with Persian rule because of that, because of that closeness in blood, sharing the same blood, sharing a similar culture. But then when the Greeks start to rise and the Greeks conquer the Persian Empire, some of these Indian nations, they actually don't accept Greek rule. And Alexander the Great has to then go try conquer some of these Indian nations because he wants to try to keep that empire together. He doesn't want the Persian Empire to fall apart. But the Indian nations aren't accepting Greek rule, but they were accepting Persian rule. You see, that's how it starts to make sense that the Persians didn't necessarily have to conquer all this because they were happy to be under Persian rule because it's a similar people connected by blood. And I want to share some other things with you that kind of do support this idea. Let me just read you a verse from, no, sorry, not a verse, but this is the quote from Herodotus, and he says, "The Thracians are the biggest nation in the world." Okay, this is at his time, next to the Indians. "If they were under one ruler or united, they would, in my judgment, be invincible and the strongest nation on earth. Since, however, there is no way or means to bring this about, they are weak." Okay, so he's saying that the Thracians are so vast with their territory and their tribes, and also they're very warlike and ferocious. If they could come together, they would be like invincible, but they're actually weak because other kingdoms can actually rule over them, maybe like divide and rule with the tribes. And so it was actually a weakness that they couldn't actually come together as one body. But it's interesting that he compares them to the Indians, that the Indians are the next powerful. So who are these Indians that he's speaking of? Because at that time, in that period, one of the most powerful kingdoms was the Persians. So are these Indians that he's speaking of actually, he's connecting it to the Persians, that the Persians were the second most powerful, and that would make sense for that time. But we see how that got this connection to the Indians again. But just to see how these Thracians were very vast, and let's just have a look at the tribes, because I just want to show you this. This is the list of the ancient tribes of Thrace and Dacia. And we can just see how many, we're not going to look at them all, but look how many tribes they are considered to be Thracian or connected to the Thracians. It's a lot of tribes. And some of these tribes are very interesting. We might look at a few of them. So we can get an idea that these Thracians were obviously important in the ancient world and covered a large area. But there's something I want to read to you to kind of just show that some of the things that we're speaking of could be true. Let's just look at the history a little bit. I'm not going to go over all this and read all this, but there's one part that I want to pick out. That's when the Persians conquered Thrace. Let me just read this part to you. Okay, it says, "This was an act of conquest by Darius the First." Okay, so he was the king of the Persians. It says, "Who sought to create a new satrapy in the Balkans, and had during his march sent emissaries to the Thracians found on the path of his army, as well as to the many other Thracian tribes over a wide area. All these people of Thrace, including the Odrysae, submitted to the Achaemenid king, until his army reached the territory of the Thracian tribe of the Getae." You see that? So the Thracian tribes actually submitted to a Persian king. Okay, so there might be different reasons for this, but we've already seen that this was a warlike people, a ferocious people. It might be surprising to now hear that they're submitting to a foreign ruler. But if we think about this connection to Cush and Tyrus, that Cush and Tyrus connected and created these Abyssinians and these Sindhis and these Indians, and we're connecting that to the Persians are actually connected to Tyrus, potentially with this legend of the Talmud. Can you see how that would actually make sense why they would submit? Because the Persians would actually be of akin. They would have blood of Tyrus in them. So then that would make sense why they would actually submit. Maybe not happily, but they were willing to be under Persian rule. But there was one tribe of theirs that wouldn't, which is the Getae, which is interesting. So I just thought that kind of supported that idea. I think what we'll do now is just look at a few other things that are not quite as strong, but just some other connection to to Tyrus and the Thracians. One of them is the Sea Peoples. It's this seafaring confederation that attacked ancient Egypt in the late Bronze Age. And they say that these Sea Peoples may have caused the collapse of many ancient kingdoms, and that's why they call it the late Bronze Age collapse, 1200 BC to 900 BC. But there is some debate whether this late Bronze Age collapse was just because of the Sea Peoples. But let's just look at a few of these nations that make up this confederation. One of them is called Teresh. Now some scholars would try to link this Teresh to look at the tribe of Tyrus, so that maybe the Thracians were involved in this this confederation. And also look, it says Troy and Tarusa, so there's a connection between potentially Tyrus and Troy. So just want to show you a few other ideas, because there's also this connection with the Thracians and Troy. Remember the Trojan horse and Helen of Sparta, the face that launched 1,000 ships, and this is Greek mythology. So what, it's like a legendary story that they're not, scholars and historians weren't even sure it was a real story. But it's interesting that they are starting to find some evidence for this in the historical record, because let me show you this in case you're not aware of this. There was this kingdom known as Wailusa, and in the Hittite records, and we've spoken about the Hittites, in their records they have a treaty between Alexander and their king Muwatalli II. So there's a treaty between the Hittites and the Wailusan kingdom, but this Alexander, scholars are starting to connect this to the Trojans, because Paris, he was also known as Alexander. Okay, so some of the scholars are wondering whether this is actually a treaty between the Hittites and the Trojans, and some are also wondering whether this Pia Maradu could be connected to King Priam. Just interesting to see that they are starting to maybe find evidence for this Trojan kingdom, that it wasn't it's not a myth, not necessarily a myth or a legend. So just a few other ideas that the Thracians may be connected to the Sea Peoples. That would take an investigation. Also maybe connected to the Trojans, and we're going to maybe look at these Trojans to see, because they do seem to come up quite a bit in the ancient world in different stories. But I think for this video we're getting towards the end of it. So this is not to become experts in Thrace or the Thracians. We're just trying to cover the sons of Noah to build a picture first, without going into great detail on every single nation, just to try get an idea of where they might have gone to, where they, what influence they had, start to build up a foundation, and then we'll slowly try as we go, learn more about these ancient kingdoms. And I think in the next video I would like to actually do another video on Tyrus, because there's something else with Tyrus that also connects to some of the work we've done, and it's to the Hittites. There's a very fascinating connection between Tyrus and the Hittites, and that's what we're going to do in the next video, before we go on to the next son of Japheth, which will be Madai. So before we go on to Madai, we're going to do one more video on Tyrus and how he's connected to the Hittites. It's very fascinating. So until that video, take care, and we'll see you soon.